I found the photograph at an antique shop in Chicago, Illinois. It was a Saturday in September, one of those perfect early autumn days when the air off Lake Michigan carries just a hint of the cold to come, and the city seems to shake off summer's torpor. The shop was tucked into a brownstone on the south side, specializing in Chicago history and memorabilia. Among the collections was a large photograph, perhaps 14 by 18 inches, showing a formal group portrait of policemen. The photograph showed 17 officers arranged in 2 rows, 8 standing in the back, and 9 seated in the front, all maintaining upright and disciplined postures. Each officer wore a dark, double-breasted uniform coat, adorned with shiny brass buttons, and a badge on the chest, along with a helmet-style police hat featuring an insignia at the front. Most of the men had mustaches or full beards, reflecting the grooming style of the 1880s, and they appeared to be between their mid-30s and early 60s. The composition conveyed professionalism and order, capturing the formal dignity of law enforcement officers of that era. But it was one officer in particular who immediately caught my attention. The 5th seated man from the left, an older officer with a distinguished white beard and a calm yet commanding expression. His posture was firm, hands resting evenly on his knees, and his gaze met the camera with quiet confidence. There was a clear aura of authority about him, suggesting leadership, seniority, and respect from the men around him. He appeared to be the commanding officer or captain of the group. The shop owner noticed my interest. "That's the 12th Precinct from 1890, he said. "One of the most corrupt police departments in Chicago history. That man there," he pointed to the white-bearded officer, "was Captain Patrick Sullivan. Turned out he was running the largest crime syndicate on the South Side. The whole precinct was in on it. Real ugly story when it finally came out." On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, was written, "12th Precinct Police Force, Chicago, Illinois, March 1890, Captain Patrick Sullivan, commanding." And below that, in different, more recent handwriting, "The Torturers." Sullivan ran the syndicate. 23 prisoners disappeared. The truth came out in 1892. I bought the photograph along with a folder of materials, newspaper clippings, investigation reports, and testimony from survivors, for $700, knowing immediately I'd found something significant. That evening in my hotel room, I spread everything out. What I pieced together was a story of systematic corruption, of police officers who used their authority to protect criminals and torture those who threatened to expose the truth. The earliest documents were from Chicago newspapers in the late 1880s, documenting a pattern that few had noticed at the time. From the Chicago Tribune, various dates 1887, 1891, missing person reports, Michael O'Brien, Sept. 1887, last seen being arrested by 12th Precinct officers, Thomas Chen, Feb. 1888, disappeared after questioning at 12th Precinct, William Schmidt, July 1888, arrested by 12th Precinct, never seen again, Sarah Morrison, Nov. 1888, last seen entering 12th Precinct Station, James Kowalski, March 1889, arrested, never arrived at county jail, 18 more similar reports spanning 1887-1891. At the time, these disappearances were not connected. They were treated as individual cases, people who had perhaps fled the city, or who had met with accidents, or who had simply vanished into the anonymous crowds of a growing metropolis. But in 1892, everything changed. From the Chicago Tribune, April 15th, 1892, shocking revelations about 12th Precinct corruption. Captain Sullivan accused of running crime syndicate. In a stunning development, Captain Patrick Sullivan and 16 officers from the 12th Precinct have been arrested on charges of corruption, racketeering, and murder. The arrests came after Detective James Murphy, an officer not assigned to the 12th Precinct, conducted an unauthorized investigation that uncovered evidence of systematic criminal activity orchestrated by Captain Sullivan and his officers. According to the investigation, Captain Sullivan had been running a protection racket, extortion operation, and other criminal enterprises for over a decade, using his position as police captain to protect criminals who paid him while eliminating those who refused to cooperate or who threatened to expose the syndicate. Most disturbing are allegations that the 12th Precinct operated a secret holding area where prisoners were tortured and killed to prevent them from revealing information about the syndicate's operations. At least 23 people who were arrested or questioned by 12th Precinct officers between 1887 and 1891 subsequently disappeared. Investigators now believe many or all of these individuals were murdered. The investigation is ongoing. I found Detective Murphy's detailed investigation report, which laid out the full extent of the corruption. From Detective James Murphy's investigation report, April 1892. Investigation into corruption at the 12th Precinct. I began investigating the 12th Precinct in January 1892 after receiving information from a confidential informant who claimed that Captain Patrick Sullivan was operating a criminal syndicate under the cover of his police authority. Initial investigation revealed a pattern of suspicious circumstances. Unusually high number of escaped prisoners. Individuals who were arrested by 12th Precinct officers, but who allegedly escaped before being processed or transferred to county jail. Multiple missing person reports for individuals last seen being arrested by or questioned by 12th Precinct officers. Complaints from residents about 12th Precinct officers demanding protection money from businesses. Reports of known criminals operating openly in the 12th Precinct territory without police interference. I conducted a covert investigation without informing my superiors, as I suspected the corruption extended beyond the 12th Precinct. What I discovered was a systematic criminal operation. Captain Sullivan's syndicate. Captain Patrick Sullivan had been using his position as commanding officer of the 12th Precinct to operate a criminal empire. His activities included protection rackets. Businesses in the precinct territory were required to pay protection fees to avoid harassment, false arrests, or worse. Those who refused were targeted. Extortion. Sullivan and his officers would identify vulnerable individuals, particularly immigrants or those involved in minor illegality, and extort money from them under threat of arrest or violence. Criminal partnerships. Sullivan provided protection to various criminal enterprises, gambling, prostitution, theft rings, in exchange for substantial payments. Elimination of threats. Anyone who refused to pay, who threatened to report the corruption, or who otherwise posed a risk to the syndicate, was arrested and subsequently disappeared. The secret holding area. Investigation revealed that the 12th Precinct station contained a hidden basement area that did not appear on official building plans. This space, accessible only through a concealed entrance in the station, was used for the torture and murder of individuals who threatened the syndicate. According to testimony from survivors and from one officer who agreed to cooperate, prisoners would be taken to this hidden basement where they were, interrogated under torture to determine what they knew and who they had spoken to, forced to reveal information about assets that could be stolen, ultimately murdered to ensure their silence. Their bodies were disposed of in various locations throughout Chicago. The officers of the 12th Precinct were all complicit in these activities. Some participated directly in the torture and murders. Others served as lookouts, maintained false records, or otherwise assisted in covering up the crimes. The operation had been running for at least a decade, with Captain Sullivan using his authority and reputation to shield the precinct from investigation. I found testimony from one of the surviving prisoners, a man who had been tortured in the hidden basement but had managed to survive and eventually escape. From the testimony of John McCarthy, April 1892. I am a saloon owner in the 12th Precinct territory. In August 1891, Captain Sullivan and 2 of his officers came to my establishment and demanded I pay them $50 per month for protection. I refused. I said I would report them to city authorities. 2 days later, I was arrested by 12th Precinct officers on fabricated charges of selling liquor without a license. I was taken to the precinct station, but instead of being processed and sent to county jail, I was taken to a hidden basement area I had not known existed. In that basement, I was chained to a wall. Over the course of 3 days, I was beaten and tortured by various officers. They wanted to know if I had told anyone about their demand for protection money. They wanted to know if I had any savings or assets they could steal. They wanted to ensure I understood what would happen if I ever spoke about the syndicate. I told them everything they wanted to know. I gave them the combination to my safe. I promised I would never speak of what they had done. On the 3rd day, I heard the officers discussing whether to kill me or let me go. Some argued I knew too much and should be eliminated. Others argued that killing me would draw unwanted attention, since I was a known businessman. They decided to release me with a warning that if I ever spoke about what happened, they would kill me and my entire family. I was released, badly injured, and I said nothing for months out of fear. But when I learned that Detective Murphy was investigating the 12th Precinct, I came forward with my testimony. I knew others had not been as fortunate as I was, others who had disappeared after being taken to that basement. The torture methods used included beating, burning, near drowning, and other forms of physical abuse designed to extract information and ensure compliance. Some prisoners died from the torture itself. Others were killed deliberately once the officers had obtained the information they sought. I estimate I saw evidence of at least 6 other prisoners being held in that basement during my 3 days there. I heard screaming from other rooms. I saw bloodstains that suggested violence. I overheard officers discussing previous prisoners who had not survived questioning. Captain Sullivan was the architect of this operation. He personally participated in torture sessions. He made decisions about who would be killed and who would be released, and he ensured that all officers under his command were complicit, either through direct participation or through their silence and cover-up activities. I found testimony from Officer Thomas O'Neill, the one member of the 12th Precinct who agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for leniency. From the testimony of Officer Thomas O'Neill, May 1892, I joined the 12th Precinct in 1888. I was 24 years old, newly graduated from police training, eager to serve and protect my community. Within weeks, I learned that the 12th Precinct was not a normal police department. It was a criminal organization that used police authority as a cover for systematic corruption. Captain Sullivan ran everything. He decided which businesses would be targeted for extortion, which criminals would be protected, which arrests would be made, and which prisoners would disappear. All 17 officers in the precinct were involved. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but all involved. Those who questioned the activities were threatened. Captain Sullivan made it clear that any officer who refused to participate or who considered reporting the corruption would end up in the hidden basement themselves. I participated in protection rackets. I helped falsify arrest records. I stood guard while other officers tortured prisoners in the basement. I helped dispose of bodies. I did these things because I was afraid of Captain Sullivan and because I felt I had no choice. But I am guilty nonetheless. The hidden basement was where the worst activities occurred. Prisoners who threatened the syndicate, either by refusing to pay extortion, by threatening to report corruption, or by possessing information that could expose us, were taken there. They were tortured to extract information. They were forced to reveal where they kept money or valuables. They were interrogated about who they had spoken to about the syndicate. And then, usually, they were killed. Their bodies were taken out through a back exit during night shifts and disposed of in various locations. In the Chicago River, in construction sites, in remote areas outside the city. I personally witnessed at least 12 murders in that basement. I know of at least 11 more that occurred when I was not present. The total number of people killed by the 12th Precinct between 1887 and 1892 is at least 23, possibly more. Captain Sullivan personally participated in many of these torture sessions and murders. He seemed to enjoy the power and control. He would question prisoners calmly, almost politely, while inflicting terrible pain. When he decided a prisoner needed to be eliminated, he would simply nod to the other officers, and they would strangle the prisoner or beat them to death. The photograph taken in March 1890, showing all 17 of us in our uniforms, looking professional and dignified, that photograph is a lie. We looked like legitimate police officers. We looked like men dedicated to law and order. But we were criminals. All of us. Captain Sullivan sits there in the center of the front row, with his white beard and dignified bearing, looking like a respected senior officer. But he was the most evil man I've ever known. He built a criminal empire using police authority, and he kept it running through torture and murder. I am cooperating with this investigation because I cannot live with what I've done. I cannot continue to protect Captain Sullivan and the others. The families of the people we murdered deserve to know the truth. I am guilty. I deserve punishment. But at least by telling the truth, I can help ensure that Captain Sullivan and the others face justice. The investigation discovered the hidden basement and found extensive evidence of the torture and murders that had occurred there. From the Chicago Tribune, May 10th, 1892. Hidden torture chamber. Discovered at 12th Precinct. Investigators searching the 12th Precinct station have discovered a hidden basement area where prisoners were tortured and murdered. The chamber, accessed through a concealed entrance, contains chains and restraints affixed to walls, blood stains throughout the space, instruments used for torture, personal effects belonging to missing persons, documentation related to the syndicate's operations. Medical examiners who examined the space confirmed that the blood evidence is consistent with multiple individuals having been injured or killed in the location. This is one of the most disturbing crime scenes I have encountered in 30 years of police work, stated Chief Inspector William Harrison. These men used their authority as police officers to torture and murder citizens they were sworn to protect. Searchers have also begun locating bodies based on information provided by cooperating witnesses. 3 bodies have been recovered so far from locations identified by former officers. The trial began in September 1892 and lasted 3 months. The testimony revealed the full extent of the corruption and violence. From the Chicago Tribune, October 15, 1892. Sullivan trial reveals decade of police corruption and murder. The trial of Captain Patrick Sullivan and 16 other officers from the 12th Precinct has shocked Chicago, as testimony reveals systematic criminal activity spanning over a decade. Prosecutors have presented overwhelming evidence that Captain Sullivan operated a crime syndicate under cover of his police authority, and that he and his officers tortured and murdered at least 23 people who threatened to expose their activities. Testimony from survivors like John McCarthy, from cooperating officer Thomas O'Neill, and from family members of the disappeared, has painted a picture of a police department that had become a criminal organization. Captain Sullivan abused his position of trust and authority in the most egregious way imaginable, stated Prosecutor Robert Wilson. He was supposed to protect citizens from criminals. Instead, he became the most dangerous criminal in his precinct, using police power to extort, torture, and murder. Defense attorneys have argued that Captain Sullivan was simply maintaining order in a difficult neighborhood, and that allegations against him have been exaggerated. However, the physical evidence from the hidden basement, combined with the testimony from multiple witnesses, has proven difficult to counter. From the trial transcript, testimony of Margaret O'Brien, sister of disappeared prisoner Michael O'Brien. Prosecutor: Mrs. O'Brien, can you tell us what happened to your brother? Margaret O'Brien: Michael was arrested by 12th Precinct officers in September 1887. He had witnessed a crime. He saw one of Captain Sullivan's officers taking money from a shopkeeper in what he later realized was an extortion payment. Michael was a good man, a moral man. He went to report what he'd seen, but he made the mistake of reporting it at the 12th Precinct station, not realizing that the entire precinct was corrupt. He was arrested on false charges. We were told he would be transferred to county jail, but he never arrived. When we inquired, we were told he had escaped custody. I knew Michael would never have run. He wasn't a criminal. He had no reason to escape. For 5 years, I searched for my brother. I asked questions, filed reports, begged authorities to investigate. No one listened. Now I know the truth. Michael was taken to the hidden basement beneath the 12th Precinct station. He was tortured and killed because he witnessed corruption and tried to report it. Captain Sullivan ordered my brother's murder, and 16 other officers participated in it or helped cover it up. Prosecutor: What do you want to say to the defendants? Margaret O'Brien, turning to face the defendants: You were supposed to protect us. You were supposed to enforce the law. Instead, you murdered my brother and at least 22 other people. You are worse than any criminal because you used the authority of your badges to commit your crimes. I hope you all hang for what you've done. The verdicts came in December 1892. From the Chicago Tribune, December 20th, 1892. All 17 defendants found guilty, Captain Sullivan and officers, sentenced to death. Captain Patrick Sullivan and all 16 officers from the 12th Precinct have been found guilty of multiple counts of murder, torture, extortion, and racketeering. Judge William Thompson sentenced all 17 men to death by hanging, stating, "You 17 men represent the worst abuse of police authority in Chicago history. You used your badges to torture and murder innocent people. You corrupted the very institution meant to protect society. You deserve no mercy." Captain Sullivan showed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced. Several of the other officers broke down in tears. Officer Thomas O'Neill, who cooperated with the investigation, received a reduced sentence of life imprisonment rather than execution. The families of the victims were present for the verdicts. Many expressed relief that justice had finally been served, though several stated that no punishment could truly compensate for their losses. The executions were carried out in stages over 6 months in 1893, with Captain Sullivan being hanged last in June. From the Chicago Tribune, June 15, 1893, Captain Sullivan hanged for murder and corruption. Former Captain Patrick Sullivan was executed by hanging this morning at Cook County Jail. The last of 17 former police officers put to death for their roles in operating a crime syndicate and murdering at least 23 people. Sullivan, 62 years old, maintained his composure to the end. His final statement was, "I regret nothing. I did what I had to do to maintain order in a lawless world." With Sullivan's execution, one of the darkest chapters in Chicago police history comes to a close. The 12th Precinct has been dissolved, and extensive reforms have been implemented to prevent such corruption from occurring again. I found one more document, a letter written in 1920 by the widow of one of the disappeared prisoners. From a letter by Catherine Schmidt, widow of William Schmidt, dated 1920. "I am 72 years old now. My husband, William, has been dead for 32 years, murdered by men who were supposed to be police officers, killed in a hidden basement beneath a police station. William was arrested in July 1888 for a crime he did not commit. The arrest was fabricated. The officers wanted to extort money from him because his business was profitable. When William refused to pay their demands, they killed him. For 4 years, I did not know what had happened to him. I was told he had escaped custody and fled. I was left alone with 3 young children, not knowing if my husband was alive or dead, unable to grieve properly because I had no body to bury. When the truth finally came out in 1892, when Captain Sullivan and his officers were exposed as murderers, I finally learned what had happened to William. He had been tortured in that hidden basement, beaten until he revealed where he kept his savings, then strangled and his body dumped in the Chicago River. The photograph taken in March 1890 of those 17 officers, I have seen it. They stand there in their uniforms, looking dignified and professional. Captain Sullivan sits in the center with his white beard, looking like a respected senior officer. But they were murderers, all of them. They used their authority as police officers to torture and kill at least 23 people, including my husband. William's body was never recovered. I have no grave to visit, but at least I know the truth about what happened to him. And I know that the men who killed him faced justice. I write this to honor William's memory, and the memory of the 22 others who were murdered by Sullivan's syndicate. They were killed because they refused to pay extortion, because they witnessed corruption, because they threatened to expose crimes. They were killed by men who were supposed to protect them. May their memories be honored. And may no police force ever again be allowed to become as corrupt as the 12th Precinct was under Captain Patrick Sullivan's command. Catherine Schmidt, 1920. I spent months researching the case further, examining records of police corruption in Chicago history, studying reforms that were implemented after the scandal, and documenting the long-term impact on the families of the victims. What emerged was a clear picture of how a charismatic and intelligent leader like Patrick Sullivan could corrupt an entire police precinct, how police authority could be weaponized for criminal purposes, and how vulnerable citizens were when those meant to protect them became predators instead. I wrote a comprehensive account of the case, examining not just what happened, but what it revealed about institutional corruption, abuse of authority, and the importance of oversight and accountability in law enforcement. The book was titled The Torture Precinct, Captain Patrick Sullivan and the Darkest Chapter in Chicago Police History. The photograph from March 1890 appeared on the cover. Looking at it now, knowing the full story, it became a deeply disturbing image. 17 men in police uniforms, arranged formally in 2 rows. They looked professional, disciplined, dedicated to law enforcement. Their uniforms were pristine, their badges shining, their postures upright and proper. And in the center of the front row sat Captain Patrick Sullivan, with his distinguished white beard and commanding presence. He looked like the epitome of a senior police officer, experienced, authoritative, trustworthy. But this photograph was taken in March 1890, by which time Captain Sullivan and his officers had already murdered at least 15 people in the hidden basement beneath their station. They would murder at least 8 more before being exposed in 1892. This photograph documented 17 criminals wearing police uniforms, led by a man who had spent over a decade using police authority to operate a crime syndicate, extort citizens, and torture and murder anyone who threatened to expose him. I received many letters in response to the book, some from law enforcement historians and reform advocates, others from descendants of the victims. But one letter moved me most deeply. It was from the great-great-grandson of Michael O'Brien, the first known victim. Dear Dr. Morrison, thank you for researching and telling the story of my great-great-uncle Michael O'Brien and the 22 others murdered by Captain Sullivan's precinct. Michael was 28 years old when he was killed. His only crime was witnessing corruption and trying to report it to police, not knowing that the police themselves were the criminals. The photograph you feature in your book, showing all 17 officers looking so professional and dignified, is particularly disturbing now that I understand what it represents. These men used their uniforms and badges as disguises. They looked like law enforcement, but they were a crime syndicate. Captain Sullivan looked so distinguished and trustworthy in that photograph. But he was a monster who used his position to torture and murder citizens for over a decade. Thank you for honoring Michael and the other victims. Thank you for ensuring their stories are remembered and that the truth about Captain Sullivan and his officers is known. Sincerely, Patrick O'Brien. The photograph now hangs in my study, a powerful reminder of how authority can be corrupted, how institutional power can be abused, and how those meant to protect can become the most dangerous predators of all. I look at that photograph often. 17 police officers in 1890, posed formally with their captain. They looked like defenders of law and order, protectors of their community, representatives of justice. But they were torturers and murderers who used their badges to commit crimes, and who killed anyone who threatened to expose them. The photograph was taken in March 1890. By then, Captain Patrick Sullivan had been running his crime syndicate for years, and at least 15 people had already been tortured and murdered in the hidden basement beneath the station. 8 more would die before the truth was finally exposed in 1892. May Michael O'Brien, Thomas Chen, William Schmidt, Sarah Morrison, James Kowalski, and the 18 others whose names fill the record books rest in peace. May their families find comfort in knowing the truth was finally revealed and justice was served. And may Captain Patrick Sullivan and his 16 corrupt officers be remembered by history as examples of how catastrophically authority can be abused when there is no accountability. The photograph looked ordinary, until it was revealed their commander led the town's crime syndicate, and all 17 officers were complicit in torture and murder. A police portrait that documented a crime syndicate wearing badges, led by a captain who looked distinguished and trustworthy, but was actually one of the most evil men in Chicago history. That's the terrible truth preserved in this photograph from March 1890. The photograph looked ordinary, until it was revealed their commander led the town's crime syndicate.